It is Thursday morning, early June, and I am westbound in the Winnebago Revel on I-70. I'm somewhere in Illinois, and I'm making my way to the mountains. I still have about 13 hours of driving to go. This week has been a bit of a scramble. Last week I attended my son's graduation and spent time with family. Cole and I also went to the World War II weekend at the Reading Airport this past weekend. It was an awesome show. Despite being born and raised in that area, I've never been there before. But I went with my 18-year-old son Cole and also my dad, who is a bit older than me. So this week there are only two things on the agenda. To get suspension and tires installed on the Revel in New Jersey, and then to make it to the Rocky Mountains by the end of the week. That might have been ambitious. I went with the Ride Improvement Package, or the RIP Kit, from Agile Off-Road. The Agile Off-Road RIP Kit consists of two front Bilstein coilover struts, full rear replacement leaf spring packs with Fox shocks, machined aluminum wheel spacers on all four corners, they're fairly thin, and wheel stud conversion. They change you over from wheel bolts that are factory from Mercedes to threaded wheel studs. There isn't any custom bracketry or fabrication that's required to fit the new suspension. You're just taking the old parts out and putting the new parts in. Just as a disclaimer, this isn't meant to be a detailed how-to video. This is just a high-level overview of the parts, gives you a general idea of the process that's involved, and then to show you the finished product. Dave started work in the front by replacing the struts. He pulled out the factory Mercedes struts, disassembled the top piece, which is the mounting point, and installed that mounting point on the new Bilstein struts. Agile Off-Road provides a neoprene cover that wraps around the coilover and closes using a Velcro strip, and that protects the strut and the shaft from the elements. He then very easily reinstalled the new Bilstein struts, and I didn't know this until I watched him do it, but the top mounting bolts for the struts are actually inside the cab in the driver and passenger footwell under the floor cover. Next, he moved on to replacing the rear leaf spring packs, which is a little bit more involved. He detached the U-bolts and replaced the leaf spring packs on the axle one side at a time. He disconnected the shocks, the sway bar end links, and made sure that any brake lines or other components did not inhibit him from lowering the axle. It's separated. Once everything was loose and he was sure that he had the necessary freedom of movement, he unbolted the front leaf spring bolt, and then he unbolted the rear bolt at the top of the shackle, so the shackle came off with the leaf spring. Once the old leaf spring pack was on the ground, he unbolted the shackle and then reinstalled the shackle in the new leaf spring. And then with Oscar's assistance, the two of them lifted the new leaf spring into place, which did take some finagling because it's awkward to get past any chassis components that might be in the way. For the RIP Kit, there are at least two optional rear spring weight ratings that you can get from Agile. From what I understand, and this is what I have, the most common spring packs that they sell for the Winnebago Revel are rated for 4,700 pounds rear axle weight. But they do have spring packs that are rated for 5,400 pounds rear axle weight. Those springs might be better if you're living in it full time, you have an auxiliary gas tank, a cargo box, and maybe you have a motorcycle hanging off the rear tow hitch. After the rear springs and shocks were bolted on, the components were reattached, and the entire suspension was correctly torqued, Dave moved on to installing the wheel spacers and the wheel studs. Installing the wheel studs was as simple as applying a dab of Loctite and then threading them into the axle, and then the wheel spacer simply slips on over the studs and is sandwiched by the wheel. Now the rip kit lifts the van about 2 inches, allowing us to better fit a slightly larger tire, but they say the largest tire you can fit on a late model Mercedes Sprinter, which is the VS30 chassis, without significant interference from the fenders and without compromising the adaptive cruise control, is 275/70R17. Now the 275/7017 is essentially a 32-inch tire, and although it works, you don't get off scot-free. You do have to make a fender modification to get it to fit. Supposedly, the thin metal seam at the back part of the front fenders interferes with the 275 tires. So you have to take off a small piece of sheet metal at the bottom of the fender, use a hammer or mallet to bend the seam flat, and then install the no-rub fender kit from Agile Off-Road to restore it to its original appearance. The kit is available both in textured black plastic and painted to match body color, straight from Agile. In just a single day, and this was Monday, Dave was able to install the suspension in entirety and one of the no-rub fenders. All that was left for Tuesday was the other fender, 5 tires installed, and a front end alignment. But that night I was able to roll the van out of the shop on its new suspension, still with the stock tires, and I drove it into Easton, to Two Rivers, to get quesadillas. The next day, before they did work on the tires, they gave the van an alignment, and that went off without much ado, and that was fine. But what they did have a challenge with was getting the van into the alignment bay. With the air conditioner on the roof, the Winnebago Revel is just about 10 feet tall. The entrance to the alignment bay? Just about 10 feet tall.
You got just as much as the last one, like 2 inches, 3 inches. Yep. I can stick my hand in between it.
I got a set of 5 General Grabber AT and 275/7017 Load Range E. I got them because they were recommended to me as an alternative to BF Goodrich All-Terrain KO2s. And the BF Goodrich All-Terrains are scarce right now in the 275 size. So I'm okay with trying a different set of tires on the van, and I'm sure the Generals will be absolutely fine. I prefer the BF Goodrich All-Terrains because that has been my adventure tire for going on 5 years now. I've been all over the US and Canada with those tires, and I've subjected them to a ton of abuse. So I trust them. I know how they're going to perform. I know they can be depended on them, and that is why I keep going back. Right, so I'm currently rolling on a set of 32-inch General Grabber All-Terrains. That is up in size from the BF Goodrich All-Terrain that comes with the van, which was a 245/7017, equivalent to 30.5 inches. I'm looking forward to airing these down and having more flotation and a bigger contact patch on the van. The 245s that were on here before in such a heavy vehicle had very little float to them. So that's why I had so much trouble with the van in soft terrain, like when I got stuck in West Virginia that one time. It's Friday morning in Colorado's Front Range. I made record time out here for me because I left Lancaster, Pennsylvania on Wednesday around noon. Now, I had well over 1,000 miles to get acquainted with a new suspension and tires. Obviously, most of it was highway, and then the last dozen miles or so was dirt road, and finally, primitive two-track. First, let's start with what the Agile Off-Road Rip Kit is not. It does not transform the van into a Lincoln Town Car, nor is it a pre-runner or a stadium truck. I promise you that if you jump it, your fillings will fall out. Honestly, do not attempt. It'd probably end much worse than your fillings falling out. Nor is the van a Wrangler Rubicon or an RTI Ramp Monster. The Rip Kit gives the suspension a lot more room to cycle than the original suspension, and it rebounds from bumps and potholes and dips much more gracefully than the stock suspension. It's still a leaf-sprung 3/4-ton truck suspension on E-rated tires, and there's not much you can do to change the dynamics of that without serious modifications. You figure it has to be sturdy enough to haul your house, and then supple enough to provide a comfortable ride, so it's a balancing act. The van feels much more firmly planted on the highway. The cab no longer pitches violently when you leave gas station parking lots at 45-degree angles. It's more tolerant of windy conditions. Driving this thing in the wind is still unpleasant, but Mercedes Crosswind Assist did not feel the need to come on once, and that's a win. Crosswind Assist is a feature with the van where it detects a strong gust of wind while you're driving, and then it engages traction control to make handling the van in that situation even more terrifying. Now, the most notable improvement that I am absolutely elated about is improved capability on primitive forest roads, and I just discovered this in the last few miles getting to this campsite. At a low-speed crawl on a relatively technical road, the suspension is very comfortable and instills a ton of confidence. Since this machine doesn't flex out and articulate with the terrain like the Jeep does, the traction control seemed to compensate for any wheel slip, and I was able to keep moving. It's still not orangey. I mean, I can't even get the thing underneath low-hanging aspens. But these upgrades brought the platform a huge stride closer to the capabilities of a Jeep Wrangler. That is about all I've got for now. Shannon is still in Texas, and she's going to meet me here this weekend in Orangey, so in next week's episode, the Jeep will be back. And that's all I really know about next week so far. I am going to take this into the van and commence editing. I hope you all enjoyed this week's, Rip Kit thing. As usual, thanks for following along, and I will catch up with you all next week.